Everybody gather around, we're going to give away a few little gold bars. First of all, I want to thank Derek. Derek, every time we needed somebody, we had a terrible legislative session, the worst legislative session that we ever had. But whenever we needed Derek, Derek was there to help us out. Now, I got a little history presentation, so we're going to spice this up a little bit, and we're going to give away a few things to anybody who's got the right answer. What we're going to talk about is all the bad events, everything that went wrong in this decade of the 1910s, to follow up with what Derek has already said.
Can we have you guys come in a little closer?
Not only did we have the Federal Reserve creation, but we had a subverted presidential election in 1912. We had the income tax installed, the direct election of U.S. senators, an incredible prediction of war that I'm going to tell you about. We had an entire U.S. media buyout in 1915. We're going to tell you all about that right off of the congressional record itself. And we ended up with the First World War. So just quickly, I want to go through this to pick up where Derek left off. For a gold bar, can anybody tell me the three banking families that created the Federal Reserve on Jekyll Island in 1910, excluding Derek because he gave the presentation? Three banking families, give us a shot for a gold bar.
They were Rothschild, Rockefeller, and there's actually 4 or 5. Morgan, Schiff, Warburg.
You already got it.
It's not a gold bar though. It's $1 million, $1 million chocolate bar, right here. For this man. All right, good deal.
All right.
I had to use an FRN to get that.
Well, we got to do a camera shot. Introduce yourself.
Come on up here.
That was like you got them all.
If you got them all, you got to introduce yourself.
My name's Ed Cotter. I've researched the Fed and the story of it for just for fun. I actually am working on a kind of my own adaptation of G. Edward Griffin's book, Creature from Jekyll Island, which is my own version of the events and how they occurred. And it goes into kind of a character study of each of the different banking family members and tycoons involved. So you can contact me in person if you'd like to learn more about that. So that's it.
All right, thank you, Ed.
Where can they reach you?
Great job.
Ed, where can they reach you? Give them a website they can reach you at.
There's really no website you can be reached at. Contact this guy and he'll contact me through you, I guess.
All right. Okay, good deal.
So much for anonymity.
Okay, for the second gold bar, the next gold bar.
Second gold bar. Second $1 million. $1 million right here.
We're going to talk about the 1912 election. This was a subverted election. It had 3 presidential candidates. The former one, the current one, and the future one, all in this election. I want to know who were the 3, except for Ed and Derek, because they've already probably know this. Can anybody tell me the 3 presidential candidates in this incredible 1912 election that subverted this entire decade?
Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Taft.
You got it.
Hey, come on up here, Hank. Come on up here, Hank.
Hank's coming up next.
The Taft.
Never mind, I couldn't think of Taft's first name, but I got Taft.
Well, there were 2 Tafts.
That's right.
But that's another story.
Yeah, I'm good.
Right, thank you. Hank's coming back.
Hank's coming back. Good job, Hank.
All right, so let's just talk about.
William.
Let's talk about what happened in 1912 and why it's so important. So Taft was running for re-election. He was going to be a shoo-in to be re-elected, but he had a little bit of a problem. He wanted to break up U.S. Steel, which was co-founded by J.P. Morgan, who was also, as we just heard from Derek, one of the co-founders, his dad, of the Federal Reserve. So J.P. Morgan Jr. decided to drag Teddy Roosevelt back out after he had served 2 terms and run him against Taft so that Woodrow Wilson could get elected president of the United States. That is exactly what happened, and we had what is ranked as one of the worst administrations in all of American history because of that. This is when the Federal Reserve was created, the income tax, and the media buyout that we're going to talk about. So, y'all know about the Federal Reserve because Derek's already told you about that. But what about the income tax? That came in 1913 as well. The income tax was expressly prohibited by the Founding Fathers. Expressly prohibited. It was the second platform plank in the Communist Manifesto. It was never intended to be a direct tax from the federal government to the people. Does anybody, for the gold coin, can anybody tell me when the income tax was originally implemented in America?
Lincoln administration.
1916.
You gotta raise your hand.
1913.
Great.
Originally.
It was originally, everybody thinks it was 1913, but Ted has already given it away, so I guess Ted's going to have to get the gold coin.
Explain why, Ted. Or you're gonna explain why.
It originated in 1861 because it was a mechanism to fund war. Keep that in mind. It was a mechanism to fund war. The IRS was also established originally in 1862. It was called the Bureau of Internal Revenue at that time. Income tax was declared unconstitutional.
Right.
Can anybody, we still have the coin?
We got another gold coin. We got another gold coin. Who wants?
Anybody know
For a
when
gold
the
coin.
The income tax was declared unconstitutional? Can anybody tell me what year?
It was 1950 something, wasn't it?
I want to say 1935.
No, it was 1895. 1895 it was declared. That's okay, we'll give you another shot for a gold coin. And it was ratified, I think everybody knows this one, 16th Amendment. You see, it was unconstitutional, so they had to change the Constitution to make it legal, and they did that supposedly with the 16th Amendment. However, how many folks here have never read the book, The Law That Never Was? Has anybody ever read that book? Can anybody tell me the author for a gold coin?
Garland Favorito.
It was Bill Benson. This is a must-read book. Okay, let me tell you what Bill did. He went around to every state in the United States, and he got the ratification documents from the states. And he found out that only 3 of the 38 states actually ratified the 16th Amendment of the United States. Only 3 ratified it properly. The 16th Amendment was declared ratified fraudulently in 1913 by, can anybody tell me who declared this ratified?
Dick Cheney.
Okay, it's not gonna go. It was Philander Knox, the Secretary of State in 1913, who declared the 16th Amendment ratified falsely. Taxes have started out. Does anybody know the original tax rate? We've lost that gold coin. The original tax rate in 1913. It was 0.5%. How far did it get? Does anybody know how high it got? 7%. It actually got up to 88% of the amount of your money over $100,000 in 1979. 88%. But that's not all that happened. We had the direct election of senators. That sounds like a great idea to me. United States, hey, we the people get to vote on our own senators. It sounds great. If we have a gold coin left, can anybody tell me what's wrong with that principle?
Takes away states' rights.
It takes away states' rights. That's not fair. You're probably I should have excluded Ted. Sorry about that. the federal government was no longer accountable to the states if the states weren't supporting and weren't appointing the U.S. senators. Now, one other thing that's important to know about this decade. Why 1913 was so important. Why is it that they all wanted to get everything done in 1913, the income tax and the Federal Reserve? Why did they want to get it all done in 1913?
I know.
Why?
Because we were distracted. We were distracted with the World War.
He's read the presentation. That's not
Just
so,
this part.
no. Charles Russell had been predicting the Armageddon and Christ's return in 1914. Let me read you a couple of quotes that's kind of significant here. He says, and with the end of AD 1914, what God calls Babylon and what men call Christendom will have passed away, as it's already shown from prophecy. We consider it established truth that the final end of the kingdoms of this world and the full establishment of the kingdom of God will be accomplished by the end of AD 1914. In the coming 26 years, all present governments will be overthrown and dissolved. So, this was going all around the world. He was preaching the end of time in 1914. Now, if you wanted to have a war, wouldn't that be the best time to do it when you had a huge segment of the world population thinking that the world was going to end? What better time would it have been to have a war and to fund war and to get a Federal Reserve set up and to get the income tax implemented and to remove accountability of the federal government to the states? Well, that's basically what happened. I won't go through all the world war situations, but in 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. Germany had declared it just before that on Russia. And we ended up with a world war, but we were not in it. We declared our neutrality. So that presented a problem for the co-founder of the Federal Reserve, John Pierpont Morgan, because he was funding the Britain and France's governments and their war machine, and he also had the sole munition supplier for the British and French governments. So J.P. Morgan, the man who got Woodrow Wilson elected, now has a vested interest in keeping Great Britain alive. And in order to do that, he has to get America into the war. So here's what he did. I'm going to ask Ted to read this. This is what he did to get America into the First World War in 1917. Ted is going to read from the congressional record of 1917 by Representative Oscar Callaway. He's going to explain that J.P. Morgan bought out the entire all of the major news organizations in the country.
In March 1915, the J.P. Morgan interests, the steel, shipbuilding, the powder interest, and their subsidiary organizations got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States and sufficient number of them to control, generally, the policy of the daily press. These 12 men worked the problems out by selecting 179 newspapers and then begun by elimination process to retain only those necessary for the purpose of controlling the general policy of the daily press throughout the country. They found it was only necessary to purchase the control of the 25 of the greatest newspapers. The 25 papers were agreed upon, emissaries were sent to purchase the policy, national and international of these papers. An agreement was reached, the policy of the papers was bought, to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers.
So you just heard from Oscar Callaway, a representative in the United States House, how the J.P. Morgan interest, the co-founder of the Federal Reserve, purchased the top 25 newspapers in the country in order to control American policy. It gets a little bit deeper.
This contract is in its existence at the present time, and it accounts for the news, the columns of the daily press of the country being filled with all sorts of preparedness arguments and misrepresentations as to the present condition of the United States Army and Navy, and the possibility and probability of the United States being attacked by foreign foes. This policy also included the suppression of everything in opposition to the wishes of the interests served. The effectiveness of this scheme has been conclusively demonstrated by the character of the stuff carried in the daily press throughout the country since March 1915. They have resorted to anything necessary to commercialize public sentiment and to sandbag the National Congress into making extravagant and wasteful appropriations for the Army and the Navy under false pretense that as it was necessary. Their stock argument is that it's patriotism. They're playing on every prejudice of passion of American people.
So there you got it. This is straight out of the United States congressional record. One very upset congressman explaining to the American people for all time how the news media was bought up by the co-founder of the Federal Reserve in order to control policy and lead us into a war in which he would profit and his organizations. But it gets better, and actually it gets worse. It gets worse. It gets worse. Because it wasn't this one congressman, another congressman on the same day, February 9, 1917, got up and corroborated everything that Oscar Callaway just said. His name was Joseph Moore out of Pennsylvania, and I'm going to ask Ted to read his statement, at least part of it, because this is critical to understand it's still going on today.
I call attention, however, not only to these false reports of the Housatonic and about the California, but the steamship Philadelphia was reported sunk since the president was here, and yet next day after these reports had gone all over the country like wildfire, and everybody got excited about the Philadelphia, which naturally attracted interest in that great city and the state of Pennsylvania. Having a little trouble with the wind. Ooh. We found the ship had safely arrived in port, so that the report was also in error. Now, whether by design or not, I do not know, but it seems that most of these false reports come from London. There seems to be an intense desire there to tell us about German outrages and American bloodshed on foreign ships, or to find that some American ship has been shot up. I simply urge that the true facts, and only the true facts, be reported at this time, when we're at the very verge of an outbreak with foreign country.
Applause. This is the Congress is now applauding this guy, applauding Representative Joseph Moore for his statements, which is not normally allowed in Congress.
I think it would be better for some of the editors to shut up when they do not know what they're talking about.
More applause. The congressmen are applauding.
I think it would be better for some of these professional patriots who have determined our international relations in advance and who insist upon adjusting our diplomatic affairs in this crisis to not only shut up, but to go tie a rope around their necks and anchor it to it and jump into the sea. We could better afford to dispense with their meddlesome services than to plunge these people of this country into a foreign war. I think it would be far better for this country.
More applause. So again, the representatives are all applauding this statement of exposing J.P. Morgan.
Mr. Chairman, I regret to say it, but we are gradually turning over the business of the Congress, turning over our constitutional rights, turning over our powers delegated by the people, to a lot of editors, theorists, and college professors who are not capable of conducting our affairs and to whom we should not abdicate.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Ted.
Thank you, Ben. We really appreciate you guys for doing that. So let me just conclude with a few things. So the British blockaded Germany, and Germany in turn was blockading Great Britain. They had a war zone. Germany was sinking ships. They decided to warn Americans. Germany decided to warn Americans that this was happening because they didn't want to kill any more innocent civilians. And Ted, I think I'm going to ask you to read one last piece here. So the Germans took out an ad in the news organizations that happened to have been controlled by J.P. Morgan. They took out an ad
And it says,
to warn.
Notice, travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies and Great Britain and her allies. That the war zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles, that in accordance with formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and that travelers sailing in the war zone of these ships of Great Britain and her allies do so at their own risk. Imperial German Embassy, Washington, D.C., April 22nd, 1915.
So in spite of the warning that the Germans put in the papers, that warning was suppressed in every major newspaper in America except one or two. And remember, those newspapers were controlled by John Pierpont Morgan Jr. So the Lusitania set sail, a passenger ship. It was sunk by a German U-boat, and we found out years later that it was carrying hundreds of tons of explosive and millions of rounds of ammunition. Even though it was a passenger ship, it was smuggling arms and ammunition to Great Britain. It was sunk. That event was used as a war trigger, and it was interesting to note also that the Lusitania was a Cunard Line's ship, which was an opposing shipbuilding group to that one that was owned by John Pierpont Morgan, the co-founder of the Federal Reserve. So Wilson then, but it still had a problem because the people of America still did not agree to go to war, so he decided to start arming merchant ships because Morgan still wanted him to get into a war. He insisted that Americans had the right to travel in a war zone. And his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, resigned because he did not agree with that. Wilson was re-elected in 1916, inaugurated in 1917, under the slogan, "He kept us out of war," while he was arming the merchant ships, knowing that they would be sunk and that we would have a war. So sure enough, that's what happened March 16 to 18. The Germans sunk 3 merchant ships that were armed, and Woodrow Wilson asked for a declaration of war in the Congress and got it. Wilson went on to become the most interventionist president of all time, and I'm going to leave you with one final statement. It's from General Smedley Butler, who was the most decorated Marine and the highest ranking Marine of all time at that time. He complained about Wilson's interventionist policies. He said, "I helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for National City Bank boys to collect revenue. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers, and I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. That is how the co-founder of the Federal Reserve implemented war in America for his own profit through the media buyout that occurred in 1915. So thank you very much. And now I've got the honor of introducing our next speaker. It was been an honor to be sandwiched between two U.S. Senate candidates. But our next speaker, Dr. Paul Brown, I think is about ready to go on. I want to talk about his voting record and his legislation that he has introduced. First of all, most representatives would not want their voting record to be exposed to the general public, so we'll see how this goes. I think that Paul Brown will be an exception. If I was voting for a representative, I would want them to stop raising our taxes. Paul Brown never voted for a tax increase in Congress. If I was voting for a representative, I would want him to reduce the size and intrusiveness of government. Paul Brown never voted to increase the debt ceiling. Why can't every other congressman vote the same way? I'd want a congressman to oppose bailouts. Dr. Paul Brown never voted for a bailout. I'd want him to cease out-of-control spending. Dr. Brown proposed the most targeted spending cuts of anyone in the Congress. What about repealing Obamacare? Dr. Brown had the best Obamacare alternative. It was called the Patient Option Act. And what about bringing back American prosperity? Dr. Brown wrote H.R. 2373, the Jobs Act. He got 100% rating from the Club for Growth for that bill and his other work. Those are the kind of things I would like from a congressman, but I got to tell you the truth here. These are not my statements. These were the mission statements for an organization called the Tea Party Express. And Dr. Brown did everything as best as anybody could in Congress to achieve every single one of the mission statements of the Tea Party Express. So what do you think that the Tea Party Express did for Dr. Brown? They endorsed his opponent, who had no congressional experience whatsoever and actually ran a fairly corrupt organization here in the Georgia state government that I happen to know something about. But who did endorse Dr. Brown? Does anybody know for the last gold coin that Ben's got one? Can anybody think of somebody that endorsed Dr. Brown?
Ron Paul.
Ron Paul, okay. Ben owes you a coin. Ted's already got it. Dr. Ron Paul endorsed Dr. Paul Brown. So why did Dr. Paul endorse Dr. Brown? There could be quite a few reasons. I can't speak for him. But what I like about Dr. Brown is that he's got this four-way test. If he's going to vote for a piece of legislation, he's got to ask 4 questions. Is it constitutional? Wow, that's kind of unique, isn't it? Is it necessary? Another good one. Is it affordable? Is it morally right? Why can't everyone in Congress do the same thing, try that same test? But that's not what we're here about here today. We're not really about his voting record. We want to talk about, this is the man who wrote the Audit the Fed bill that passed the U.S. House by a vote of 333 to 92. But that's not all. Not only did he do the Audit the Fed bill, he also introduced a bill to abolish the Fed. And he also introduced a bill to take us back to the gold standard. So, you're tired of hearing me. I'd much rather listen to Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, I'll give you the best congressman that has existed in this land in the last year, Dr. Paul Brown.